First tonight, the fight over foster care in this state and just who gets the kids. 2 years ago, James Wood QC produced a landmark report into Child Protection Services, finding that community services was failing to provide adequate levels of care for children placed in what's known as out-of-home care, foster care. Instead, the retired judge and Police Royal Commissioner recommended that non-government organisations were better placed to provide that care. The state government promised to implement the reform, but so far, nothing. 2 years on, and this week, the state's auditor-general released a report finding that community services is chronically understaffed and incapable of meeting the needs of children. Tonight, a coalition of not-for-profit foster care providers is venting its frustration and alarm, telling Stateline that vulnerable children are falling through the cracks of a broken child protection system with an entrenched resistance to change. Nick Grimm reports.
My experience of being a foster carer with the community services has been a very, I would probably say, isolated journey. I started off with an NGO and then was transferred over to community services, so I got to see quite a difference between the two.
This foster mother wants to be known simply as Faye. It's not her real name, and she asked Stateline to hide her face and alter her voice so she can't be identified.
The community services, if they knew my identity with me or with any foster carer, we would get such a hard time.
Despite the precautions, though, Faye would be unlikely to be recognised by her allocated caseworker from community services.
I've never met my caseworker and I've never seen the caseworker, he or she, and so I've just been plodding along as I have.
So a community services caseworker hasn't even been to visit this home where your foster child is living?
No, never. Not for the last 2 places I've lived, actually.
I believe that home visiting is far less apparent. You know, it's not happening as regularly as it should be, if it's happening at all.
Katie Stewart is a foster care caseworker, but not with community services. She works with Anglicare, one of the non-government organisations currently responsible for around a third of foster children in New South Wales.
Have a seat. Thanks. Did you have a nice weekend?
Stateline couldn't accompany Katie Stewart on one of her real home visits to a foster carer, but this is a typical scenario where face-to-face contact is made with the foster parent or the child, either individually or together.
Did he talk much about his family, or...?
Yeah, he really enjoyed seeing little Peter.
According to Katie Stewart, many kids under the direct supervision of the New South Wales government simply will not receive support like this from a community services caseworker.
Well, community services are just dealing with, you know, they're so understaffed and overworked that they aren't able to keep up with the demands.
This week, a report from the New South Wales auditor-general found community services so stretched, the number of caseworkers to each child is half what it should be. What's more, the auditor-general says 500 caseworker positions are currently vacant, though the government disputes that figure. But the problem isn't a new one. 2 years ago, a special commission of inquiry into child protection services, led by retired Judge James Wood, identified serious shortcomings in what was then known as the Department of Community Services, or DOCS.
There are simply not enough DOCS out-of-home care caseworkers to provide a satisfactory level of service to carers and children.
Police still don't know the identity of the little boy whose body was found in a suitcase floating in a duck pond in Sydney.
James Wood's inquiry was set up in response to the public outcry that followed the 2007 deaths of 2 children who in their tragically short lives had become known to DOCS. 2-year-old Dean Shillingsworth's body was found stuffed in a suitcase, while 7-year-old Shalay Ward starved to death in her home at Hawk's Nest, north of Newcastle.
DOCS caseworkers who don't want to be identified have told the ABC they simply can't cope with the workload.
One of the key recommendations from James Wood's report was that the bulk of foster care services should be taken out of the hands of community services and transferred to non-profit, non-government organisations.
For many children in out-of-home care, DOCS is not able to meet even the most basic requirements of allocating a caseworker and conducting an annual review of the placement. a gradual transition to NGOs being responsible for more and ultimately most children and young persons in out-of-home care should address this issue.
But it's been 2 years since that recommendation, and now, tired of waiting, a coalition of non-government foster care providers has come together, telling Stateline they want action from the government. The coalition includes Anglicare, Catholic Care, Life Without Barriers, Bernardo's, the Wesley Mission, Youth Off the Streets and Uniting Care Burnside.
We argue that this is an urgent moral obligation on the government to fix a broken system.
We feel like we've been waiting for a long time. So we know that Justice Wood recommended the transfer. We know that the first recommendation for transfer came in 1982. We want to see a transition plan in place, and we want to see the money in place to enable every child who is in out-of-home care and every child who will enter out-of-home care over the next few years receive the level of services that they deserve, and we want to see that from both the opposition and the government before the election.
Uniting Care Burnside CEO Jane Woodruff is a former Director-General of the Department of Ageing and Disability. As a one-time senior public servant, she believes she knows how government works in this state, and she believes community services is obstructing and delaying the transfer of foster care services to the cost of the children.
Well, that's just not true.
Not at all?
No. In fact, I've had a very recent discussion with some of the people that you're talking about, and I think where it really comes down to a difference of view is how quickly it should happen. You can't just transfer out-of-home care overnight. This was always going to be a 3 to 5 year process. But the important thing is that we've started that process.
The Minister has said to us that she is committed to transfer, but I'm afraid that saying that you're committed to transfer is not enough. We want to see the plan.
So if the Minister is committed to transferring foster care to NGOs, and the NGOs say they're ready to provide that service, what's the hold-up? Well, for a start, the union representing community services staff is firmly opposed to the change, saying the best solution would be for the government to properly resource the department.
What I'm arguing today is you shouldn't take the resources that are put into DOCS and just shift them to the NGOs. You need to build the capacity, not transfer the capacity.
But are you just about protecting the jobs of your union members?
No, we are about protecting the jobs of our union members. I won't deny that. We're a union, we look after our members. Transferring from DOCS, who has primary responsibility for protecting children in the community, to the NGOs, we say is a recipe for failure.
The Public Service Association says a properly resourced community services would be best at providing foster care, but others would need some convincing.
Dealing with the community services is very hard, very hard. When I have seen them, it hasn't been easy. It's changed my life. The kids changed my life in a good way, but the department or the community services, makes my life difficult.
This foster carer says the problem is not with individual caseworkers at community services. She's known plenty of good ones. But at the end of the day, they're just in too short a supply.
I mean, some of the foster children that you see, they're third-generation foster children. I mean, and people don't realise that we're perpetuating more foster children if we don't do the job right.